This week, you're going to hear about Daniel's journey, how he went from being abused, put into an adoption home, being abused again, finding a parent, a couple that would take him in after, during the interview, he peed on the wall.
Daniel's story is one of going from struggle as a youth to being an inspiring, resilient dad, software engineer, and mentor to foster parents. He grew up in foster care from the ages of 2 to 5 and was beaten, verbally abused, and told he wouldn't amount to anything.
This is an incredible story of how someone who by society's standards should be written off end up in prison or an institution.
And up until 15 years ago, he didn't give a shit about anyone or anything, he says.
And yet this man has followed a path because his parents put the hard work and love into him.
He was eventually saved by the Hall family and his wife Tina. Daniel is an amazing software developer, graphic designer, and a passionate advocate for fostering and adoption. Together with Tina, he's adopted 6 children. He says that they have been and continue to be his biggest teachers in life.
That taught him the importance and love for music, the appreciation and profitability from tech, computers, science, and then it converted him into a man who found love on eHarmony, a dating site, and then through the encouragement of his wife, they adopted and have multiple children now, biological and adopted.
So how does everything you've told me so far tie in with your slogan that you've been lifting up when you drink a drink?
Oh, yeah. Size matters. So, when we talk about, first, let me say that our children got me that for Christmas 2 years ago. And it was a reminder to me that it's not go big or go home in our house, it's go small or go home. Because if you look at the things, the chapters in my life, it's all those little things along that journey that got me to this moment in time talking with you. Those small little things that get you up that rung in the ladder. None of those grandiose, huge moments can happen without all the little steps to get there. So it's go small or go home. And it's a reminder that size really does matter. Let me share a quick story with you about that. So when my son was 2 years old, I was still trying to process my trauma from, being a little boy, and I would yell and scream at him because I didn't understand why he was yelling and screaming at me, and he was only 2. And Tina turned around to me and said, "You need to stop. You need to listen with more than just your ears to what his needs are." The next day, I reeled from that and started learning sign language, ASL. And, by 2 months, he was signing please and thank you and more, more. And it was the first time I could communicate with him, even though he couldn't, talk. And so if you fast forward to last year, my daughter was working in a restaurant and she says, "Dad," she comes home from work, "Dad, the coolest thing happened to me today. A deaf lady came into the restaurant and nobody could understand her. So I had her write her order down, and my daughter didn't know enough to fully understand what she was signing. So she had the wherewithal to have her write it down. And when my daughter brought it back to the table, she went, "Thank you." And the lady signed, "You're welcome." And it was just a surreal moment of connecting that small step of taking the time to learn sign language. And it just had an impact on her that she was able to communicate. Look, at the end of the day, we all just want to be heard. And she could hear this lady, and she could feel that empathy. And it was just a surreal moment for me, because it reminded me of where that came from, and that chaos that eventually bred success for not only her, but for me as a person, and for Tina as well. I mean, we taught it to all of our children, and it's not just me teaching, it's, everybody. And our kids were teaching the younger kids, and so it was reciprocal.
Lots of folks in your position, lots of kids that could have, and they have gone in a downward spiral. Their lives have gone completely downward spiral. They've turned to, violence, prison, jail, drugs, and even worse than that. When do you think that pivotal moment was where you said, I'm going to go down the route of positivity? Or is that something that was always instilled in you?
It was something that was instilled in me, but I certainly didn't practice it. I mean, I was 12, 13 when I was stealing money from the church collection, as an altar boy.
Anything in the world. But here's the other thing too. I have lots of friends who have decided to not have kids. And I would say a couple of years ago, maybe I was like, I would be a little bit more judgmental, but now I get it. And I respect everyone's decision, whether to have kids or not, because some people don't want to be parents and aren't meant to be parents. And I think that's a big part about foster and adoptive care. Some people have children out of, I don't even want to say mistake, because no children's a mistake, but they unplanned, right?
Yeah.
And there should be a place for every kid, and you and your wife are doing amazing things there. So I want to transition out of this, but what would you like to share with everybody out there around adoptive and foster care?
I'm gonna spin off of what you just
Please.
said about people not wanting to be parents. One of the best things that you can do is know what your limitations are. And I completely respect anybody that does not want to be a parent. Because
if you're not going to give it your all and be a good parent.
Yeah, you know what your limitations are, and it's not you, and that's okay. But if you do decide to go down that route, absolutely 100% know that you're going to lose your time. Your time is not yours anymore. That's going to be a limitation on you. Find out what your limits are, or learn what those limits are with one placement before you start saying, oh, I'm getting a call. I got 2 more children. And don't be afraid to say no, because your limitations are at 1 right now. So know what your limits are. Part of being a great parent is knowing what your limits are and being able to stay within those boundaries.
That's a very good point.
Now let's take that back to my childhood. When I was 2 through 5 years old, I was placed in a foster home, which was a very abusive home, Jax. And we would be, I know I would be beaten. My brother was tied down in his crib. We were locked in a room, and my foster dad would back me into a corner and say, "You're nothing but a piece of shit. And you're never going to amount to anything in life." And so the hall showed up, and I knew I needed to get out of there. So I whipped it out and I started peeing all over the wall.
So you did that because you knew that would get you out of that situation.
Yeah, I wanted somebody to see that I needed help, but I didn't know how to ask for it, which is something that we struggle with as adults as well. And so the halls showed up, and they looked at me and figured that I probably needed the most help. But it was just that consistency of showing up with them and reinforcing that, and continually reinforcing that, and being so consistent, that really helped me to get to each part of my teenage life and keep going. And so high school was when I think I really started to blossom, because I really took a heavy interest in music. I told you they got me that trombone when I was 10. And by the time I was in high school, I got really good at it. And by the time I was a senior, I was first seat, first chair in the Northeast in the US. And that was just an amazing experience for me. And when I graduated from high school, my mom and dad didn't have a lot of money, but they had saved up enough money to send me to the All-American Winds Concert Band. And I was second seat, first chair. We traveled for 21 days to Italy, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Switzerland, and Austria. That was one of the most memorable, amazing trips that I had ever been on in my entire life. And that was back in the late 80s, 1987. So again, it's just them showing up. It doesn't matter what I dealt out for crap, and what they felt that they may have failed in, and my yearbook, my freshman yearbook, my mom wrote something that I probably should have listened to. And that was, don't go through life worrying about how successful you are. Go through life making the most of your mistakes and learning from them. I was 17 when she wrote that. And so true, how true that is today as an adult. That when I told you what I wanted on my epitaph was really heavily focused on my mistakes and how I've learned from those mistakes. And it's such a tribute to my parents and how they showed up for me every day.
Man, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing, Dan. I really appreciate you being here today.
What did your mom's journey with cancer teach you about life and about kindness?
That was a tough one. I was a teenager and I could not process the whole losing my mom very well. And it was easier for me to step out of visiting her in the hospital than it was to face reality that I was going to lose the really the pivotal person. My mom and dad are both pivotal people, but it was tough. It was a tough time. It was a tough time. And just so blessed that I found somebody that was so much like my mom to remind me of all the good things that my mom had given to me. So it was a rough time.
It sounds horribly rough, and you learned from it and you move forward. Like you did, like between 2 and 5, horrible for a kid to experience that. But you learned from it and you moved forward.
Yeah. It was a new day. It's a new life. It's like I got a new lease on life with our family. With Tina and our kids, and just a whole different level of appreciation for my parents. It took me 40 years to appreciate all the things my parents had done for me. And it wasn't until we had those two little girls, 4 and 8, that came into our home when I saw myself through their eyes. And my mom had passed by then, but I called up my dad and I told him, Dad, I'm so sorry that I always thought you were a hard ass on me. And I told him he was my hero. It was the first time I heard my dad really tear up and cry. Yeah.